Hi, welcome to my tutorial on MySQL by Alexis Becker. We're going to talk a little bit about what MySQL is, its usefulness, and how it might be utilized by individuals in the field. MySQL is a database management system. Version 1.0 came out in 1996, although according to an article by David Axmark and Michael Widenius, MySQL really has its roots in 1979 when the company that would create MySQL began first working with databases. There are different versions of MySQL out there. The most recent one, as you can see from the screenshot, is 8.0. You can purchase versions of MySQL, which has greater computational elements to it, but there's also a very powerful open source version of it, which many of us have probably already utilized in some of our classes here at Rutgers. The database management system uses SQL, or structured query language, and it is itself a relational database, meaning that different tables are related to one another and you can store that information in this one source. MySQL is extremely popular according to a book, Learning SQL. You can see the picture of that on the right-hand side, written by Alan Bieliu. Never quite sure if I'm saying his last name correctly there, so I apologize if I'm not. He talks about MySQL at the time of the writing of the book in 2009 having about 10 million different individuals having downloaded it, the free version of it. So it's clearly pretty popular. It's also, according to Andy Uppel, who is the writer behind Databases Demystified, the most compliant with industry standards for relational databases. In the early days of database management systems, many companies created their own versions of the database management system, so standardization wasn't something that was around in the early, very beginnings of these database systems in this language. The structured query language SQL was first originally called SQL in the late 1970s. However, in 1986, the American National Standards Institute decided to implement particular standards, and according to Appel, MySQL is extremely compliant with those standards. It's also very powerful, as you can see in that last bullet point there, which we'll talk a little bit more about in the next slide. It handles a lot of information very quickly. I looked up some of the different uses for MySQL. You can see in the screenshot there that the homepage for MySQL discusses, well, actually just kind of shows you some of the many different groups that utilize their technology, and there's some really big names there, as you can see. I also did a little bit of research on some of the other examples that you might find MySQL being used for, and the full citation information you can see at the end of this tutorial here. But New York University Health Sciences Libraries utilized MySQL when they decided to monitor elements like website visits, interlibrary loans, circulation trends within their system. MySQL was used to store all of that data in one location. Similarly, the Los Alamos National Laboratories Research Library utilized MySQL for many years, but decided to turn to it when they wanted to create a database of all the scientific journals and citation information. And over the course of that project, they looked through 55 million articles, and that's where that sort of quote from the previous slide comes in. The article that I looked at for this one talked about how MySQL was able to handle 1.5 billion rows of data in this research libraries system, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. And the third and the final one on this particular slide talks about psychiatric risk readmission. One of the articles that I looked at, a group of individuals were looking at individuals who are admitted for psychiatric reasons into a hospital and then discharged have about a 14% rate of being readmitted. And the individuals were interested in trying to determine what might be factors that lead to their readmittance so that they could maybe tackle that early on. And for this particular project where they were looking at many of these factors, they also used MySQL to store that data that they then analyzed. So it becomes, a really helpful tool in data storage and then data analysis. How do you utilize it? Well, what makes a database so special and different? When I was doing the research for the tutorial here, I came across Sherry K. Cabral's Linda Campus video, and one of the things that I liked that she did was she discussed how helpful a database is over, say, maybe just a straight spreadsheet, which I took a little screenshot there of a made-up spreadsheet that I made. And I didn't even populate it with information. But you can imagine if all of this had information in it, it'd be hard to kind of maneuver around, analyze. I wouldn't have a way of just asking questions. As the MySQL database system, as I will show you later, you can ask questions of that and it'll spit back information to you. If I wanted to, let's say, change a copyright over on this side, well, okay, I could change it once here, but if I'm using other sheets or other tables with it, I'd have to change it in all of those as well. Whereas in a database like MySQL, if you change it once, you can apply that change then. Similarly, if I wanted to maneuver the copyright information from, say, most recent date to the least recent date, I could do that for the copyright information, but that doesn't mean that everything else to the left of it would be altered as well. And so then I will have messed up my system, my information. Databases are a little bit different. MySQL is set up differently so that you can query different types of information from one table. What you're looking at right here is actually a table that I currently have on my SQL workbench, which is part of the database design and management sample tables that they ask us to implement, which are actually taken from, with like a few differences, from the MySQL book that I highlighted earlier in the slideshow. What you're looking at right here is the sample database for the employees. So you have their number, their ID, you have first name, last name, their titles, the day they started, the department they work in, the branch they work at, and then something called a superior employee ID. All of that information is stored in here, and then I can use different commands to gain some of that information out. For example, if I wanted to simply know what the employee first name, last name, and what their title would be, I could do that up here in this system, and then all this extra stuff that I'm not interested in could disappear. So let me show you what that might look like. Go to my SQL here. So here's my database. So I would select, I want the first name, I want the last name, and I want the title. And I'm taking that from this table, which is title employees. So that's what I write there, employees. And to end that, I put our semicolon there, and I can hit the little lightning bolt to execute it. And there I have it. All that extra stuff is gone, and I simply have the first, last name, and title of all the employees in my database here. It's quite helpful when you're trying to glean out certain information. You can store a bunch of different databases within your single database, or I'm sorry, a bunch of different tables within your single database. In this case, we were looking at employees just now, but I have a number of other databases in this sample database from my class. There's an accounts, there's a branches, there's customers, departments. You can do quite a lot. And all of these are related in some way. That's what makes MySQL a relational database. How might we see that? Well, for example, here's once again our employees in our sample database. One of the things that you'll notice over here on the right is that each employee is given a branch ID. Well, what does that relate to then? We have a table over here called branches. Let's see what that looks like. Well, clearly in this table, that branch ID relates to a branch name. So it tells us where it is that they work. So if I wanted to, I could easily kind of look that information up in a relational database, like the one that we currently have. So let me show you how that might look. If I go back to my employees here, so I want to add a little bit to this. So I want first name, I want last name. I don't really need the title, so I'm going to take that out right now. I'm still working in the employees, But here's the thing. Now I want to know where they work. What's their branch ID? So I might say where branch ID is equal to 1. And then I can run that. And now I have the names of the 6 individuals who work at branch 1. That where, though, is something new that I haven't brought into our conversation. That's one of the elements that we're going to highlight in a couple of slides. There are quite a few different commands that you have to get a hold of and grasp. But one of the other amazing things that this MySQL relational database can do is that you can utilize, say, a questionnaire on an internet platform that people are filling out or they're inputting their own data. And then that information can be sent to and stored in your MySQL so that you can then utilize that information later and study it and learn different elements from it. So what you're looking at here is a screenshot from my Rutgers Infotechnologies 550 course where we were asked to create a survey. And what all I've done is hit 3 for each of them, just so I can show you what happens here. Once I hit submit, that information gets stored in the database that I have on my MySQL Workbench platform. You'll notice down here, the most recent submission is all 3s. That's the one that I just did. It's storing all of this information that I can then go through later and look for patterns, similarities, differences among all of that data. The thing is, though, there are a variety of query commands that you have to know in order to utilize this effectively. I just showed you the where one, right? Where you actually highlight what it is that you're looking for. There's a real learning curve here when you're trying to make sense of all of these different commands and what they mean and how they operate together. There's what I would say maybe the limitation to the system, the difficulties with the system, is that it's something that you really do need to have a pretty solid grasp of in order to make sense of and really utilize the system to its full capability. There are different orders that have to be followed. There are different rules that have to be followed when you're ending a clause, when you're sequencing a clause. Parentheses become very important in how the system itself looks at your questions, looks at your queries. So I would say that that's probably the biggest difficulty and limitation with the system, is that it can kick back incorrect information if you're not really understanding how to question your queries. So in summary, MySQL comes in different platforms. There is a purchase version, but also an open source version. It has a very long history of being used. Numerous companies use MySQL in particular, and that it does require you to really understand the language to make sense of it. Thank you so much for taking a look at my tutorial. Good luck implementing MySQL.